Is Rassie Erasmus, and by extent Jacques the greatest Springbok coaches there ever was? So quick disclaimer, I'm really only talking about coaches in the 90s and onwards. The reason for this is because, well, the amateur era was just way too long ago. I wasn't even alive back then, so I don't feel it's fair for me to comment on that. Another reason is that being an amateur era coach is very different from being a professional era coach. They're not really comparable, so it's also not really a fair comparison. And of course, I think you can't talk about Rassie without talking about Jacques. They took over at the same time. Jacques, in my opinion, brought just as much to the table as Rassie did, the new defensive system, and just a whole host of other things. So we need to give credit where it's due. So let's start with Rassie and Jacques. Obviously, the biggest claim that they have to being the most successful is that they have 2 World Cups. No other coach has that. However, if we look at their actual win percentage, they've only won 42 games out of 63 matches, which is a 66% win percentage. So that's fairly average for Springbok coaches. Usually they're in that middle 60s range. And compared to some international coaches, that's not as high as others have been in the past. So personally, I do think that these two are the best coaches that we've had, and I'll get to that at the end of the video, so make sure that you watch to the end. Let's move on to Kitch Christie, 1994 to 1996. He has the best win percentage of any coach, 100%. He won 14 games in a row, and this is particularly impressive because there's no other coach in the professional era that has a 100% win percentage, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I don't think there's another coach, at least a coach that has played over 10 games with their team. However, it should be said that 14 games is quite low. That's not a massive amount of games. So it was a record at the time, 14 games in a row, won, but it's not a lot of games. So that is the caveat. Another thing is that it came against some pretty weak teams as well, like Canada, but he also won a World Cup. Kitch Christie was undoubtedly one of the best coaches ever, and I'd love to hear your opinion as someone that followed the Springboks back then. What's your perception of him? Another coach that I want to mention is our beloved Jake White. He also has a World Cup and a 66% win percentage, 37 out of 56 games. Now, he's gotten probably deservedly a bit of flack in the media recently. As I said, for me, he was really the first coach that I remember since I started following rugby. So he's got a bit of a special place in my heart. However, he had an incredible group of players to work with. So how much of that was really exceptional coaching? Obviously, he's an amazing coach. You wouldn't win a World Cup without being an amazing coach, but how much of that was really up to him and the group of players that he had? So despite talking a lot of shit in the media recently, I really like Jake White, so I'd love to hear your opinion on him as well. Now moving on to Nick Mallett. Nick Mallett is probably the most consistent coach in terms of wins. He has the highest win percentage of all coaches that had more than 20 games, with 71%. So he won 27 out of 38 games. Mallett is also really great to listen to. He understands the game at a level that a lot of people don't. When you listen to him talk on SuperSport, he does amazing analysis sometimes. But it's not just enough to know a lot about rugby. A lot of being a coach is being a good man manager. And apparently he had his team management wasn't the best at times. Some of the players didn't like him. And another thing is he also didn't have a good relationship with his employers. So I don't really have an opinion on this. I'm not qualified to talk about this. Maybe some of you in the comments can give more context to this. That's just the impression that I'm getting. So Nick Mallett was a great student of rugby, but he didn't excel at some of the other areas that were just as important. So those were some of the coaches that I was looking at. I don't think I missed anyone here. I was thinking maybe putting Peter de Villiers in here, but I don't think he was that great. He inherited an incredible group of players. So while he did win the Tri-Nations, I don't think that he was that great of a coach. I think he was a good coach. I think sometimes he gets a bit more shit than he deserves, but I wouldn't put him in the conversation for the greatest. Now let's get to why I think that Rassie and Jacques are the best coaches, the best Springbok coaches probably ever. And the reason is they just had so much adversity to overcome, more than other coaches in my opinion. The two biggest things, well, the first one is they took over during a very dark time for South African rugby. We had record-breaking losses. We lost the most in a given period of time, I believe. It was just a terrible, terrible time. And to turn that around, not just to turn that around, but to turn that around and then win a World Cup, that is exceptional. That has to be one of the greatest turnarounds for an international rugby team ever. They've also had a lot of innovation. We know Rassie and Jacques as these coaches that constantly try new things, and that's commendable and all, but they work. So they also understand and they're creative, but they create systems in the team that is very, very useful. And another reason is I don't think a lot of people, particularly international fans, don't talk about this or give the credit here where it's due. Rassie and Jacques had to deal with COVID. Now, every country had to deal with COVID, but South Africa was specifically hard hit during COVID. Pretty much every other Tier 1 nation had games going on while the Springboks didn't play, specifically in 2020 and 2021, that early period of 2021. I don't think a lot of people realize that during this World Cup cycle, the Springboks were on the back foot from the very beginning. The first year is very, very important in a new cycle because that's when you can really try out new things. You can build more depth. You can just do so many things with that extra year. And the Springboks didn't have that. They were a few games behind, I mean. And the fact that we still managed to get such a massive amount of depth, it just shows how strong the management in the team was and how good Rassie and Jacques were at managing the players. And then lastly is just the fact that they've helped rugby grow since they've taken over. South Africa is a massive rugby nation, but what's even more impressive is that the sport is really growing in the country as well, specifically in some of the poorer communities. And I think a lot of that is up to our recent successes. So these two have helped the game become more healthy and reach new heights in the country since they've taken over. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Is there anything extra that you could add? Maybe some of you that are more knowledgeable can tell us, what about the amateur era? Which coaches in that period would you rank as being the best? Anyways, cheers guys.